Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Kayla Unfiltered, the Housing Call-In Show. Let's kick off another episode of real conversations, real stories, and real housing issues that impact landlords, tenants, and taxpayers across this beautiful Ontario. If you've seen me or followed me for a while, you know show is really about keeping people informed about what's happening across all the housing landscapes because decisions are being made every week at city halls and Queen's Park that directly impact housing providers and tenants. And a lot of the time, people don't even know what's happening until these policies are already in place. So before we get into tonight's guest, I want to quickly bring everyone up to speed on a few things happening right now. First, over in Brantford, the city has recently ran a housing survey that we didn't quite get to know about it quite yet. That has now closed, and based on the questions that were asked, many of the people were expecting some of these ideas to eventually land at council. So we have to be able to keep on what's happening in Brantford's council now. Some of these things that are being discussed include rental licensing or registration programs that are programs where landlords would require to be registered or obtain a license for their rental properties with the city, often tied to inspections and compliance requirements. They're also looking at rental protection or rental replacement bylaws, which typically come into play when buildings with 6 or more units are being demolished or converted to another use. The goal is to protect the existing rental supply and support tenants who might be displaced through the redevelopment. Other policy tools being discussed is rental renovation licensing, which would require landlords to obtain a special license when doing major repairs or renovations that require tenants to temporarily move out. The idea behind this program is to ensure that the rules underneath the Residential and Tenancy Act are being followed and to provide additional protection or support to tenants during the renovation. Now, they're also looking at conversations in the survey around financial incentives, things like grants or tax relief that could potentially help landlords upgrade their rental units or potentially build more rental units or affordable housing. But as many of you know, policies like this do come with unintended consequences. And that's why it's important that our housing providers stay engaged when these conversations start happening at their municipal level. Now, meanwhile, in Toronto, we're seeing another situation that's getting attention. Residents in West End apartment building have begun a rent strike, protesting a landlord's application for retroactive 2025 rent increases that could extend 5%. This is tied to the above the guideline rent increase process, and the situation like this is often highlighted just how tense the housing conversations become in Ontario. I would like to point out, if you do have a tenant that wanting to take part in a rent strike movement, make sure that you report their monthly rental payment history to frontlobby.com. And then there's the story coming out in Hamilton that many people have been watching very, very closely. Mayor Andrea is currently involved in a legal dispute with her former common law partner, Ben Leonetti, over a property that was once their shared home. That case involves the condition of the property and the responsibilities of the repairs, which are estimated to cost about $131,000. The city issued a property standards order requiring repairs to be completed by May 1st, and the matter is now scheduled to be heard in the Superior Court the week of April 20th. There's obviously a lot layers going on to this story, and tonight's episode, we're actually going to do a fireside chat after this call with Marc and some of our Hamilton landlords and residents to talk more about it and get their perspective from the ground, because I think it's important to get in people in the trenches. But for now, I want to get into tonight's guest and tonight's conversation. As always, I'm encouraging everyone to watch, share, jump into the chat, share your thoughts, and be a part of the discussion. This show works best when people are participating, bringing their experience to the table as well. And the one quick reminder before we start, if you haven't already, make sure you fill out our Ontario Landlords Watch registration form. It helps us understand who's a part of this community, whether you're a landlord, a property manager, realtor, contractor, paralegal, or just someone that's working in the housing space, so we can keep building a stronger voice across Ontario. And that's my goal. And now tonight, before we even get into this conversation, I would like to introduce my guest speaker. And tonight I'm joined by Marc Goldgrub. I believe I got that. Yeah. Lawyer with Green Economy Professional Corporation, who is licensed in both Ontario and the New York State. Marc has built a reputation for speaking openly about some of the biggest challenges facing housing law and the landlord and tenant board. And he's not afraid to tackle difficult conversations. I think it's we're in the same boat here. Marc's background is pretty interesting. After serving in the Israeli military, he's attended Cardozo, I believe it, Law.
Yeah, Cardozo Law.
In New York, worked as a major U.S. media law firm, and eventually returned to Toronto, where he completed Canadian law degree requirements and launched his Green Economy Law in 2020, focusing on major policy challenges, including the housing. And tonight, Marc and I are going to dig into some really important issues that many people in the housing space are talking about right now, including how the Divisional Court is dealing with tenant efforts to delay evictions after decisions are made at the landlord and tenant board. This is a big one, guys. Concerns about the long delays of written LTB orders, where adjudicators sometimes take so long to release decisions that detail from the hearing that can become unclear, creating serious issues when cases are appealed. The lack of accountability, the cost recovery when parties bring bad faith applications to the landlord and tenant board, especially when the current rules cap cost awards at outdated $700 per hearing, which that's new to me. And we'll also talk about Bill 60 and what the potential impacts could be on housing law and the rental system in Ontario. If you're a landlord, a tenant, housing advocate, or just someone trying to understand what's really happening inside of the landlord and tenant board, this is going to be a really important conversation. So make sure you stay with us, engage, drop your questions into the chat, and let everyone know that just because Marc is a lawyer, this is all purpose for not legal advice, personal advice, entertainment purposes, whatever you want to call it. So let's get into the show. Marc, thank you so much for reaching out and following me on LinkedIn. And I love how you're going to be outspoken. And obviously, guys, I haven't heard everything that Marc has to say. So this is going to be new information for me. And hopefully we don't get into a debate. I like debates, but are we on the same page? Are you seeing something a little bit different than I am?
Well, we work with both landlords and tenants, so we're not biased to one side versus the other. We see everything wrong with the system from everybody's point of view.
Now, just to get us started, what are you seeing right now at the landlord and tenant board system from a legal perspective, and how that is it the same? Is it improving? Is it the same? Like, what are you seeing?
We're seeing some applications get scheduled a little bit faster. I've noticed it's not consistent. It's like every now and then we'll get an application scheduled within 2 months, 3 months, where you used to be like you would never have anything before like 6 to 8, 10 months a year. That being said, we also see cases where like we filed stuff 8 months ago, and we're saying, what's going on? Why have we not even gotten a notice of hearing yet? And we emailed the board, submit a request to expedite, and we're like, what's going on here? So I wouldn't say we're seeing like a broad improvement. I would say sometimes we're seeing a little bit faster movement, but the LTB is still riddled with all kinds of problems.
Okay. Now, what's the biggest misconception landlords and tenants have about the legal process at the LTB right now?
I don't know if there's one biggest one.
I know.
I see no shortage of misconceptions all over the place. Maybe one misconception I often see is people think that they're going to get a lot more money than they will. I always tell people the landlord and tenant board does not give big awards, even for pretty disgusting behavior. So, like we represent some landlords and we'll have tenants file claims against them for $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, like crazy, or they'll say I'm only going to settle for like $70,000, and we're like, you'll be lucky if you get $6,000 in this case, if that.
That's how much they're asking for?
We had a case the other day where the tenant was asking for over $20,000 for ridiculous stuff. Like basically they had no claim whatsoever, and they were represented by a paralegal. And we went to an ACC, an adjudicative case conference. This is kind of a new thing, which we can get into that in a second. But we went to the ACC, and we basically went through. I was representing landlords. We went through the application. We said, like, this is a T2. The application was a T2, and we said, this is a maintenance issue, should have been in a T6. This is also should have been a T6. This doesn't have dates for it. This isn't like a real claim. They said like they held a wedding in the backyard, which disturbed me. And we were like, you haven't said, how did it disturb you? Did you tell the landlord to disturb you? Like, how did you suffer? Quantify your damages here? Basically, it was like a $20,000 claim. And we went through it at the ACC saying like, this doesn't apply. This is, doesn't have dates. This doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. We went through the whole thing at the ACC, and maybe like a month later, the tenants rep just withdrew it because they knew we were going to go to a hearing and basically just get it dismissed. So instead of the tenant spending more money on that, they said, you know what, we really have no claim here. But we see stuff like that all the time.
Now, what's your opinion on the new case hearing?
Oh, the adjudicative case conferences? I know why they're there. They're basically, I think the idea here with the ACCs was they're like settlement conferences. For anybody who doesn't know what these are, they're relatively new. The LTB kind of just started doing them maybe a year ago, maybe less than that. Like I don't remember any announcement about ACCs. I don't remember any kind of press release. The LTB is now doing adjudicative case conferences. Like we just started getting notices of these things, and we were like, whoa, what is this? We'd already been doing like landlord tenant board stuff for like several years, and we just started seeing these ACCs come out of nowhere. We're like, what is this? So we show up to one, and we're like, oh, it's a settlement conference. That's really what it is. So like they have them in tenant cases. They don't seem to have them in landlord cases, but it seems like every tenant case they have an ACC, and the idea seems to be that you'll get an ACC, and the tenant will show up, and the LTB will look at the application and say like, everything wrong with it, because there usually is a lot wrong with tenant applications especially if they're not drafted with a legal representative. But even with legal representatives, you'd be amazed how many of these things just like get dismissed immediately. So the idea is that they go to the ACC, and the adjudicator will usually say like, this is everything wrong with your application. You might want to amend it before you get to an actual hearing. The LTB's amendment process is extremely undefined. There is no amendment form. You would think that the LTB could just create a form for amending applications, but they don't. They basically just figure it out, figure out how to do this. So when we do it, we write a letter. We basically write a letter to the LTB, and we say, we would like to amend the application as follows. Now, a lot of paralegals, what they'll do is they'll do kind of similar to amendments in the courts, where they'll have the application and they will go through it with like a pen or Adobe, but it's probably easier with a pen. They'll just like cross out whatever they want to change. So they'll often do this with a pen and cross it out and scan a physical thing and send it in, which to us looks very janky. So we do it our way, and we, sometimes we'll have paralegals will say, they did it the wrong way. And we'll say, show us the rules where it says how we're supposed to do it. And they're like, everybody knows you're supposed to do it this way. And basically the adjudicators we've never had an adjudicator disagree with us. One of them said, please do it this way. But they accepted our amendment anyways. Okay, I should probably stop there. But anyways,
okay. So with all that, it sounds crazy.
Hold on. Let me just say one last thing about the ACCs. Where parties are represented, the LTB should allow parties to basically just say, we don't need this, because often we'll go to an ACC, the parties will not be anywhere in the realm of settlement, and everybody pays their legal representatives to submit evidence for the ACC, show up at the ACC, spend a day on the ACC,
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, we didn't accomplish anything. Like, I'll see you again in 6 to 8 months. So they should allow people to just say, this doesn't make sense for our case.
Okay. Now, if a landlord is doing this all by themselves, what personal advice could you give them if they have been told to do this way of mediation, let's say, because that's what it technically is? What advice would you give them as they walk into this?
If you're the landlord on the other side of an application that's going to an ACC, well, one, it is always good to try and settle things. If you're on your own, then you don't have to worry about the legal cost aspect. But that's something as legal reps who are not cheap. Like we don't do new LTB cases anymore. We stopped taking new LTB cases in October. We only do reviews or appeals, and we make exceptions, but generally speaking, we don't do them because we're doing a lot of higher paying work. So in order for the LTB cases to be worthwhile, we had to keep raising our prices. Now we do $2,200 a month plus $800 for a hearing. That's $3,000 basically for a month in a hearing. So let's say you have an ACC, you're paying us at least $3,000 plus tax to go and deal with this ACC, and you're going to pay at least that again to go to the full hearing. So we think a lot about costs, but if you're not worried about cost, then you go, and I would say they're very low stakes. If you can, try and settle it. If you can't settle it, then what you can do is you could try something. So there's like it kind of you start getting into a lot of things can go in many different.
Where to go?
So many different ways. Like sometimes we point out the issues with an application because, like in this other case, we told the client, we said, look, we can point out all the issues with the application. And in that case, because the application took so long to get to an ACC, it was over a year beyond when a lot of those claims had, arisen. So the person couldn't actually amend 90% of their application. So we were like, well, we can point out everything wrong with this application because they can't fix it at this point. But if you're a landlord and you're looking at the dates here and they can still amend, they're still within like a year from when the issues arose, then you don't want to point out their issues. We had another case where we were representing the landlord and we had an ACC involving a tenant application. And and they said, do you want to raise any preliminary issues? And we knew that the application had 0 dates, so it was going to get dismissed immediately. So we basically said, look, there's a lot of time between now and the hearing. If the paralegal thinks there's anything they want to change with it, we're not going to, say anything now. We'll wait to the actual hearing, and then we'll deal with what the application looks like then. We were kind of hinting to the paralegal that there was something wrong. The adjudicator was kind of hinting to the paralegal that there was something wrong. But their paralegal, who frankly, we submitted complaints about this guy because he shouldn't be practicing law. But yeah, he was so arrogant.
Can you share his name? No, you can't share his name.
No, I'm not going to say the name.
Come on.
The guy was so arrogant that notwithstanding that everybody's kind of hinting to him that you got problems with your application, he's like, we're going to take your guy to town. We're going to, take him to the cleaners. Your guy is dead, blah, blah, blah. He's going to, he's going to lose this case. So we get to the hearing and we're like, this guy, there's 0 dates in this whole application for also like over $20,000 in tenant claims. We said, there's not a single date here. And the guy ended up speaking for 2 hours to try and cover up the fact that he wrote a garbage application. And the adjudicator was like, look, you have no dates. You have no dates. I'm dismissing this.
Now, I want your opinion. When you have an adjudicator situation happening, you have a full-on hearing, and they allow similar like this paralegal to talk for 2 hours. Like, what's your feel on that? Do you feel that there should be some type of time limit on a hearing, especially for the complication? Let's say it's just non-payment of rent. Like, there should be some type of time limit on that. Because this is why we're seeing some hearings getting adjourned. We're seeing
it's hard to like put in rules around that because like it's a lot of things like depend on the actual circumstances. I wish, like, sometimes I just wish. So I kind of know why sometimes an adjudicator will allow a party to talk for an absurd amount of time because they're worried that if they don't, they're going to get challenged for like procedural violation that, oh, you didn't allow me to present my case. We had a divisional court case where this was the exact thing. There was it was actually like an articling student who was kind of acting with a lawyer representing a tenant, and they didn't do a great job. And they basically kind of just like were throwing whatever they could at the wall. And the adjudicator was like, look, I gave you 2 hours to talk. Like, you're not giving me anything that's helping your client. You're giving me a bunch of like ridiculous stuff. Like this case featured a whole section about hockey sticks, like somebody throwing hockey sticks. And the adjudicator was like, look, this is an eviction for personal use. This hockey stick stuff, and there was like blueberries, there was all kinds of ridiculous stuff. And the adjudicator was like, I don't want to hear about hockey sticks. I don't want to hear about blueberries. Like, none of this is relevant. Like, why are you telling me this? Like, I'm shutting this down. And they like wrote that in their order. Or they said, like, I gave this person a lot of time to talk, and they were just saying a bunch of irrelevant stuff. And then they appealed, and they made the argument that I didn't have time to make my argument. And we were on the other side of that appeal. And we said, we wrote in our factum, we said, how many more hours did this person want to talk about hockey sticks and blueberries in a personal use eviction case? It doesn't, there was no violation, and we won that, but it wasn't like a huge lift.
And you know what? This is why we're hearing more about cases going to divisional court now after a landlord and tenant board decision. For landlords watching tonight, can you explain what the divisional court is and when someone can appeal it?
Yeah, so you can, if you lose a case, you can appeal it. You can both ask for review at the LTB and you can appeal to divisional court. And we always tell people, do the review first. And if you lose that, then if you really, really want to, go to divisional court. But it usually doesn't make sense to go to divisional court. And I'll explain why. Basically, in the LTB review process, and this is going to get changed a little bit with some of the changes in Bill 60, but we don't exactly know how, because Bill 60 was like, it basically told, I think, Tribunals Ontario or the LTB to write regulations around like the parameters of appeal, because they're very broad right now. You can basically like say whatever you want was wrong with the case, and Bill 60 said create some parameters. It wasn't specific, but it said create some parameters. So we don't actually know what that's going to look like. I mean, people were like, this bill is going to be so terrible, and we're like, we don't really know. Most of it's pretty. It didn't really make such big changes, and some of the changes it made were left to the regulators to figure out what the details would be. Anyways, in a review, you can say anything wrong with it. You can argue that the adjudicator got the facts wrong. You can argue that you didn't have procedural fairness. You can argue that the adjudicator didn't explain themselves enough in their order. You can argue all kinds of things, insufficient reasons. You can argue all kinds of things in a review and potentially win. The LTB can say this was this order, it has serious errors, and therefore we're going to overturn it and send it to another hearing. So I always say, if you have a problem with the order, do a review first. If you lose the review, and really, and also we see this sometimes, that people don't hire a legal representative for the review, and then they want to do an appeal, and then they hire a legal representative, and it's like, you should have hired the legal representative for the review, because once you get to appeal, this is the issue with appeal. You've only got 2 rounds to argue now. You can argue in divisional court. Okay. You can only argue error of law, which is that the LTB like just straight up got the law wrong, which they do, or you argue procedural fairness. And sometimes the lines here get blurred, but you can't argue error of fact. You can't say, the facts are just wrong. The divisional court's going to say that's out of our jurisdiction. You can try and there's a way to do it, to get to argue. You would basically try and argue that the facts were wrong because of some kind of procedural fairness, or that it was an error of law that resulted in the facts being wrong. There's ways to do this that we do, but it's really hard to win a divisional court case because you're really working in very narrow parameters now. And it's a long process. It's an expensive process. We often tell people, like, is it worth it for you to spend $10,000 to $20,000, maybe more, on this appeal? Because if it's not, just don't do it. Like, you might be unhappy with the outcome, but if you're trying to appeal like $3,000, $5,000, and it's going to cost you $10,000, $20,000, like, it just doesn't make sense. You might be pissed off about it, but just do the math.
But
we tell people that all the time.
But tenants would normally bring their appeal to the divisional court for a delay tactic.
See that, yeah. Well, tenants will basically, sometimes for a tenant it's worth it. Like, even if you lose, it could be worth it. Like, let's say you got a really good rent, and you're locked in. You got a controlled rent, and you don't want to lose that. You might have, like, maybe, let's say you have $1,000 a month, and if you get evicted and you have to find a new place, you're looking at maybe 2.5 or 3, and you also don't know if you're going to find a rent controlled place. This is the issue with removing rent controls, that you create housing Hunger Games, that people are, it's not necessarily only that people are worried about paying higher rent. They're worried that Lisa,
I do that, and I throw people off all the time. We're live. That's what happens.
So hold on. You're not just worried about paying higher rent, but you're worried, maybe I can't find a place that I actually like that's going to be rent controlled. So people are really worried about that. So sometimes they might say, look, if I appeal this, even if I lose, if I get another 8 months out of this, and I'm looking at, saving $2,000 a month potentially for 8 months, that's $16,000. They might make a logical decision and say, actually, it's worth it for me to potentially pay $10,000 to $20,000, even if I lose, because I'm going to get 8 more months here and save, $2,000 a month maybe. So there's all kinds of ways to look at this, but usually that's when it makes the most sense, when it's a tenant with a good rent and they really don't want to move. But sometimes they get free legal representation,
even at divisional court.
Yeah, we've seen, and this is actually, I have a big problem with this. That, we'll see people get a legal clinic or something who will represent them for free, and it's like, so basically the taxpayers are now paying, at least to some extent, often it depends on the legal clinic, but the taxpayers could be paying for a tenant to have a lawyer represent them in an appeal that is basically garbage. We've seen that.
Oh my God.
That's gross, frankly.
And I think it goes, have you seen a judge throw out the appeals by tenants at divisional court when a tenant has not paid rent? So obviously,
yes, we have seen that, but they're the way that these things work. So let's say somebody, we've had cases like this where a tenant doesn't pay rent. We had one case where the person owed $50,000, and they appealed their eviction to divisional court. So we go to divisional court. What usually happens in a situation like that is we ask for a case conference, and we ask for a case conference, and we say to the judge, look, this tenant owes $50,000 and they're appealing their eviction. We think that their appeal should be predicated on them paying their rent. And the judge will usually say, okay, they have to pay X amount of dollars by this date, and if they don't pay it, I'm going to lift the stay. I'm going to lift the stay of their eviction, so that they might even be able to finish their case. Maybe that's a whole other discussion, but they say, look, I'm not leaving the stay in place if this person owes $50,000 and that amount is growing. So and then what do you think happens in those cases? Usually the tenant doesn't pay, the stay gets lifted, and it becomes a whole. Some of these tenants will hold on with their fingernails, and they'll file this and they'll file that. Like, it gets, you'd think it would be simple, but it usually is not. When somebody's that far deep in the hole, they're pretty desperate, and they're willing to do a lot of things to stay in there. And the courts, frankly, are too tolerant of this ridiculousness, and it's blatant ridiculousness, and they're way too tolerant of it.
Now, what's the number one, or what kind of arguments are the tenants using in the court to try to stop or delay the eviction at the divisional court, and that is deeming them to be acceptable? Because Because I've heard sometimes
Yeah.
people are applying to divisional court, and that's to delay the eviction. They're supposed to make payments, but then they don't, and they can't. The divisional court's not lifting the stay automatically to the sheriff, and now they're going and waiting for the delays at the divisional court. And I hate having to do this show because I think we're educating our professional tenants of this next layer,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
The dark arts. Yeah, I worry sometimes about basically revealing the dark arts to people. But I assume like some of these guys are going on Reddit and like finding strategies because they come up with things that, frankly, I'm like, I never even heard of this, and I hear about it from tenants who are like really like doing everything they can to find however they can to challenge an eviction. But in terms of like what are they doing, what are they saying, like they'll try anything. They'll throw anything at the wall. They'll say, I have kids. I have a mental health issue. I'm in the middle of a divorce. I don't have a job. It's like every excuse you can imagine. I
No
couldn't find a lawyer to help me with this case. I'm denied counsel because I couldn't find a lawyer who wants to take my garbage case, and also I can't pay the lawyer. You'll hear all kinds of insane things, and
And then
judges
they
are
wonder
way
why
too tolerant.
landlords are leaving Ontario.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, so I I'm like generally like an institutionalist, like as somebody who works in these institutions. I'm like these institutions, they're not like corrupt, they're not like malevolent institutions created by like faceless elites. Like I'm like somebody who generally likes institutions. And I don't like it when, you have a politician, I'm sure we can all think of some who badmouth the courts, like just because they lose. I don't think that's a good thing. Like, we should respect that we have these divisions of power, and there's a reason for divisions of power, and those divisions of power are crucial to the well functioning of any democracy. That being said, when you have judges who are just making totally ridiculous judgments, it destroys people's faith in the system, and understandably so. And we've seen way too many ridiculous judgments come out of the judges of this province. And when Doug Ford starts saying bad things about judges, I'm like, never have and never will vote for Doug Ford. But I'm like with him on this. I'm like, some of this stuff is just crazy.
I know, but at the same time, we see what the Liberals and the NDP, like if you want an example of what NDP looks like running the province, just take a look at what's happening in Hamilton, right? So that's where we kind of see, it's like everyone says he's not a true conservative, but at the same time, like I've been advocating for quite some time, and I've never seen something come out of that office like Bill 60. Now, before we get into Bill 60, because I know we have a lot and we're waiting for it to be proclaimed, people are just, wanting to exercise their rights. But when you talk about the way that how long it takes for the adjudicators to issue orders at the landlord and tenant board, because that all contributes to the, waiting for 3 to 4 months for the hearing. Then we have to wait for the order. Then we have to wait for the sheriff. And then we have to deal with the reviews and the stays and the divisional court. What do you got to say about that part?
Well, Bill 60 doesn't do anything to get orders out faster. It reduces the time to seek review. It does not reduce the time to seek appeal. So we looked at this bill and we were like, maybe this is actually good for our business because somebody's going to miss 15 days to do a review. And then they're going to say, oh, no, I have to do an appeal now. So we're like, really, Bill 60 didn't do much. Frankly, it was like it just like kind of did a little trimming around the hedges, and people made such a big deal out of it. And I'm like, it doesn't help landlords that much, and it doesn't hurt tenants that much. It doesn't do that much for anyone, really. There should be deadlines for accountable deadlines for when orders have to be issued. And the biggest issue we have with the fact that they used to say an order has to be out in 60 days. Yeah. And that is no longer on the LTB's website. Now they just, we issue an order whenever we feel like it, whenever we get around to it. And I think the reason for that is that they don't want to fire adjudicators. And basically they're like, if an adjudicator takes 3 months to write an order, are we really going to do anything? Are we really going to fire them when we don't have enough adjudicators and we can't pay them and whatever? So they just have no accountability. And then adjudicators will forget what happened at the hearing. They'll take 60 days, and then they'll be like, What happened at the hearing? Do I have time to listen to the recording? That takes too long. I'll just make something up. And they will make up a whole different hearing. And we've had this happen several times, and we do a review and we say, here's the recording, here's the hearing, and never the twain shall meet. And we get them reversed because on review, the adjudicators will be like, this is not what happened at this hearing. And we think that the reason that adjudicators make this up is because, one, by the time they sit down to write the order, they forgot what happened. They don't listen to the recording, and there's no consequences if they make it up. You know whose problem it is? The parties who have to go to review and then go to another hearing and pay their legal counsel to go through all that all over again. They have to suffer. The adjudicators, no consequences whatsoever. No investigation, no demerit, nothing if they just straight up make up a whole different hearing than what actually happened.
Well, again, I'll go back into like Bill 60 where I like the 7 days. I think we advocate for 7 days. Yes, you can file a little sooner, but sometimes it's just about the punishment.
15 for review.
No, this is for like the filing for like non-payment of rent. 15 for the review. We'll get
you're talking about between like a notice, like
just like the notice, and it's just about
doesn't make a huge difference. It's like, okay, they cut it by 7 days. You're still going to be waiting 3 months, 4 months, 5 months for a hearing.
But we're looking at 3 to 4 now typically, but if we can make it accountable for tenants to pay the $186 filing fee, then the 7 days is almost like a motivator to make sure that the tenants pay. But I always try to keep encouraging our landlords to be able to make sure that they're reporting the tenant's monthly payment history to Front Law Beach so it gets into the credit bureau, so it also holds them accountable. But back to the overall review process, what my concern was like, yes, you're going to take it from 30 to 15, stopping people from abusing it, but there's also that little tiny spot or progress of what they can do. They can actually ask for an extension. So are they removing that as well as they take it from 30 to 50? Because right now it's 30 and you can ask for an extension. They're going to keep it. They're going to go bring it to 15 and still have it in play where tenants can use it as an extension.
So I never see, I'm sure it happens, but I'm surprised. I never see people ask for an extension of that 30 days. They usually do it they usually get their thing in on the 29th day. Probably with the 15, we're going to see more requests for extensions, but since it hasn't come into force yet, as far as I'm aware, we haven't seen any extension requests. They can still request an extension. I mean, the 15-day thing, it's like, I think it's also probably just going to see a lot like worse review requests written. You're just going to see people like, at like 11:50 the night before, they're going to like scribble something down and submit it, and the adjudicator's going to be like, what is this? This is, what is this? A big issue that we see sometimes is that if it's just super long, if the review request is just like 3 pages long, this is like a dark arts thing. The LTB will just be like, I don't have time for this review hearing. They'll be like, I don't have time to go through this whole thing and, reject it or whatever. I'll just, why don't adjudicators just issue immediate decisions? Anyways, so yeah, for that question, why don't they just issue immediate decision? I think it's because they want to actually review the evidence. Because like when everything is happening, they're like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. Like it's all like just like going so fast. So I think they're like, well, give me a second to actually like sit down, think about what everybody told me, look at the evidence and see, does it actually match? Does it actually support? They might not also know all the law. Like I think sometimes what they do is they're like, I don't really know what the law is here, or I might be a little iffy on it, or somebody just threw 5 cases at me. I need to go read those cases now. And I can't just scan them. So they're like, look, let me take a second to look at the evidence, look at cases if they're applicable, and write out a decision before I make one, instead of making one at the hearing. And then, what if somebody makes a decision at the hearing, then, after the fact that they didn't look at the evidence or they missed something in the evidence. So I get why they often reserve their decision.
Now, I had a question, like, I know we got 20 minutes and we're jumping over to talk about Hamilton because we're always about trying to keep everybody informed what's happening in each city. Is there any real accountability when orders are overturned because of the errors or delays, bad faith applications, and cost recovery? I think it almost goes into the question that Lisa also had, where it's like, have you seen bad faith applications fail due to landlords moving in at any time during the first 12 months, sometimes well beyond what would be seen reasonable? So I got a little two there. I did two.
Okay, hold on. What's the first question?
The first one, is there any real accountability when orders are overturned because of errors or
No,
delays?
I'm not aware of, I don't know if they're doing it behind closed doors and we're not hearing about it, but I don't think there's any accountability. I don't think there's any accountability whatsoever. Somebody, writes an order, makes up the facts, completely gets the case wrong, and I don't think they're afraid of that. I think they're worried about getting overturned. People don't like getting their orders overturned, and especially if you're the adjudicator whose orders always get overturned, that you're not going to have a good reputation among your colleagues. So I think that's the main thing that some of them worry about, and that's why they're often like, if somebody wants to talk for 2 hours, they don't want to stop them because they're worried that they're going to get overturned for not, giving somebody enough time to talk. But in terms of making stuff up, I don't think they're worried about anything. And I've seen some really disgusting things on the part of adjudicators, and we've submitted complaints against adjudicators, and I don't think there's any accountability.
I took part in watching a hearing, and the guy's like, if you don't like what I have to put out there, you can reply for review.
Yep.
It happens all the time. I don't take offense to it. He was just like, it's a part of it. And you know what? You're right. Like, they don't want to fire adjudicators because there is such a long process into finding them, interviewing them, training them, and getting them on the floor. And what's sad and unfortunate is that we're seeing that process roll out, and time and money being spent into retaining potential candidates, and then they get into position, and guess what? They resign well before their contract is ended. So a lot of it comes to that revolving door situation. And I think it's like that because it's making it so complicated. I think the landlord and tenant board is just so complicated. I think they have a lot of baggage to hold. We got Section 83, you got Section 82, all this kind of comes into play, and allowing tenants to just abuse the fact that they can't pay the rent or they won't pay the rent, and then they allow it to go through all these levels of government and process in order to stay in a property even longer and try to take advantage of landlords at times. Do you see it coming from divisional court between tenants applying for divisional court, or more of the landlords applying for divisional court?
No, I mean, usually it doesn't make sense for a landlord to apply to divisional court because it's usually it just doesn't make sense for all kinds of reasons. So it's almost always a tenant who got evicted who's appealing their eviction. That's one of the 90% of the time, that's the only scenario where it makes any kind of sense. Because they're also, they're thinking, let me just, sometimes they just do it without legal representation, so they have no legal costs. And the courts are very patient with them. And they'll file these garbage applications that are horribly drafted, nonsensical. And the courts are like, well, they're self-represented, okay, whatever, we'll accept it. So they just drag it out. And that's, often what we're seeing. And we're representing the landlords in those cases.
So right now, you mentioned that the cost awarding limit is at $700 per hearing, which says
they never award that, and they never. I've literally
I've never
seen them award $700.
Is that a divisional court?
Oh, divisional court will. Oh, the divisional court awards more. No, they're not bound by the $700. They'll award $3,000 is pretty common. $2,000, $3,000. We see that all the time. In a case that costs 10 to 20. They'll usually award $3,000 in a case that costs somebody $20,000. But LTB has the power to award $700, and they literally never do it. I've seen complete garbage applications, trying to evict tenants for rent that they've paid when it's obvious that they've paid it. And we've tried to tell the other side they've paid the rent. Here's the accounts, here's everything. Why are we going to the LTB? Why are we doing this? And they're like, we'll get back to you never. And we go to the LTB and we tell the LTB, look, here's, the emails, here's the account statements, here's everything. The LTB will be like, it looks like they pay their rent. Do you have any evidence to suggest otherwise? And they'll be like, no. And we'll get the case dismissed, and we'll say, they should pay the costs, and the LTB just won't award costs. The only time I ever saw the LTB award any costs was one case where a tenant sought review of an eviction and then went on YouTube and said, I requested a review just to spite them, and they didn't show up at the hearing. And so the landlord submitted the YouTube video into evidence, and the LTB was like, okay, so this was totally abusive process, like about as abusive process as you could be. And then you went on YouTube and, boasted about your abusive process, and the LTB awarded $200 in that case. But that was the only time I ever saw the LTB award any cost, any, and I've seen really disgusting things.
So don't discourage our landlords from sharing their story on this channel. We can always keep you completely blacked out. You can put your name as Bob Smith if you really want to, as long as you're telling your story, because this is information I think that our elected officials need to hear, especially with Marc coming on and telling us his opinion and understanding about the delay in the orders, the adjudicators not following pretty much like the rule of law, the struggle that we're seeing, having to try to hold on to adjudicators, and thinking, Bill 60 is taking such a long time to get proclaimed, and just people are excited just to be able to serve the tenants just a little bit quicker, stop them from trying to do that review process. But again, we obviously see that overturn, I think, Marc, when we talk about that extension, which they always do. And you literally opened my eyes tonight just in the fact of like the tenants are using legal aid in order to appeal their cases at the divisional court. Now, if you're working with legal aid as a tenant, like with the numbers like $10,000 to $20,000, is that going to be pretty much similar pricing that legal aid would charge?
I mean, we don't, I don't know, like we don't accept legal aid. We don't deal with that kind of side of things. So I really have no idea like what their arrangements are. I think, and we also have these like flat fee packages for divisional court. Like if we were billing, like we were originally billing hourly for divisional court stuff, but like the numbers were just crazy and people would just run out of money. So we were like, okay, we should just do a flat fee for this so that, we can ask for it in trust. Everybody knows what they're paying. And like, if we're billing hourly and people just don't have the money, like it's not a good business model. But in terms of like the amount of hours it takes to deal with these cases, it's a lot. It's a lot of time.
Now, what would you say would be the biggest change? Even like you don't talk really highly of Bill 60, but what would you think the biggest change of Bill 60 would be to that impacted landlords and property managers?
I mean, it kind of depends. Like the bill directed the LTB to write some regulations, but we don't they were very vague about it. They were like, just write some regulations around reviews, write some regulations around like what is persistent non-payment of rent, because nobody really knows. Like there's case law going, is it 8 months? Is it a year? Is it 5 months? Like depends on the adjudicator. There's a lot of things where the adjudicators just had the adjudicators just have so much discretion. And Lisa coming with all the questions today.
I know, and you know what? You don't have to answer anything from a legal perspective, but I love that Lisa is so engaging tonight. Thank you so much.
If a legal aid repeatedly abuses the process, I mean, the thing is, we had one case where a tenant, maybe even more than one, where a tenant was represented by a legal clinic, like a free legal clinic or something, and we won costs against them, and they had to pay like $3,000, somebody on legal aid, and we're like, did the legal aid pay it? Like, I don't know. So I don't think that the clinics get any kind of admonishment or consequence, but the person they're representing could. And we've definitely seen that.
Wow. Okay. That was a good question. I love that because I know a lot of sometimes I know a lot of our landlords are actually pretty impressed by the paralegals that are representing tenants because they do so much digging up and preparing for the hearing that they're actually very impressed that these people get it for free and landlords have to pay for it. So again, we kind of advocate for that part of it. What are some of the most common mistakes you see landlords make during a hearing or at divisional court in their paperwork that ended up hurting their case?
So before I answer this, I'll just say back to Bill 60. I think without knowing what the regulations are going to look like,
Yeah.
The limit on reviews, I think, might actually be, like, all things considered, it's not a huge change, but it might be the most substantial change because we expect that it's going to result in more appeals. That's what we're expecting. I mean, we'll see. Because the LTB does make mistakes. They make a lot of mistakes. They got these time pressures. They forget what happened to the hearing, so they make mistakes, and people are pissed off. And orders get reversed all the time, usually on review. But I think we're going to see more people appealing because they're going to miss that 15 days. They're going to self-rep. They're going to lose. They're going to spend 8 days trying to find a legal rep, another 3 days paying them, and then 3 days later they're going to miss their deadline, and then it's going to become a question: do I want to ask for an extension or not, or do I want to just appeal? So, okay, but sorry, your question. Sorry, what was your question again?
What are the most common mistakes you see landlords make during the hearing with their paperwork, either in landlord-tenant board or divisional court, that ends up hurting their case?
We see mistakes in notices all the time. People we'll work with landlords and we'll say like, here's the notice. Like, if there is an I that is not dotted, like, we worry about any kind of tiny error in a notice. So there is section 212, I believe, which says that if there's minor errors, the board can overlook them. But it's up to the adjudicator to decide what constitutes a minor error and whether they want to ignore it or not. So
how come that wasn't in Bill 60?
Well, that's already in the law. It doesn't need to be in Bill 60. It's already in the Residential Tenancies Act.
Well, but that would be with the adjudicator to determine what would be considered a minor error.
But it's kind of hard to. You could just like, there's all kinds of errors you can't even imagine, like the amount of potential errors somebody could make. Like, you write, like, we have a case that's been going on for like 2 years where a landlord owns a property and the property has like a front and a back, and the front and the back have different unit numbers. So they hired legal counsel, and the legal counsel basically just made a mistake that they like put the front on the back and they put the back on the front. It's like one digit. Like one is like 60 and one is 61. And they made a mistake, and basically, like, we went to the board and told the board, like, look, they made a typo. Everybody knows where they live. It's one property. It's not two different properties. It's one property, but the front is 61 and the back is 60, or vice versa or something. And they just made a mistake. And this one mistake has caused so many problems, so unbelievable amount of problems. This one tiny mistake. And you can't amend a notice. This is a big issue too, that like, the problem is, like, let's say you got like an N12 case and you make like a typo in the notice, and now you've waited 8 months to get a hearing or something. And it turns out, you have a typo in the notice, and you're like, okay, but it's like a one, maybe I wrote unit 2 instead of unit 3 or something. Everybody knows where this person lives. It's like a typo. Come on. You can't fix it. Like, your options are basically start the whole thing from scratch again, or ask the adjudicator to overlook it with 212. And if you get, like, a lot of adjudicators, they'll just be like, I don't need to overlook it. I don't need to overlook this typo, so I'm just going to dismiss this. And like, this ridiculousness, so basically I would tell landlords, like, before you submit anything, like, read it over 20 times. N4s, this is a big issue. People mess up their numbers. You have to write like what rent is owing, and if you get the numbers wrong, like, you're going to get your N4 tossed. It doesn't matter if your tenant might owe you $50,000. Thankfully, we haven't encountered this issue yet. Because, if we're writing, we know to be careful, because we've seen a lot of people come to us once they screw up their case, and then we have to deal with the screw up. But yeah, like, check your numbers, like, do math, do AI. Like, if you do AI, double check the AI. Like, your numbers got to be on point, because we've been on the other side of this, where we represent a tenant and they get an N4, and we go to the board. Look, if the tenant's like basically gaming the system, we won't take their case. We'll say, we're not taking this case. But sometimes we have a case where a tenant paid rent, and their landlord, usually it's a corporate landlord, hiring the cheapest paralegal they can find, and they'll just put a bunch of numbers on their N4 that came out of their tuchus, and we'll go to the board and we'll say, you know, we don't even have to get into the question of whether this person paid the rent or not, because this person doesn't know how to do math.
Yeah.
Their numbers don't add up.
Would you suggest if a tenant is filing at divisional court, should the lawyers represent themselves or should they lawyer up as well? Because they can't have a paralegal at divisional court, right? It has to be a lawyer.
Yes. So hold on. Your question is, should tenants, I think you said, should lawyers represent themselves? Do you mean should tenants?
Should landlords represent themselves?
Landlords represent themselves.
Yeah, if a tenant's bringing an appeal at the divisional court, should the landlord lawyer up or represent themselves?
I mean, yeah, lawyer up, because like, you know, you might not know like that you have to do, if the tenant hasn't paid, you know that you should request a case conference and ask for a conditional order. A court might not give a conditional order if you don't ask for one. And if they violate the conditional order, how do you tell the court that they violated it? Like, we've seen people make all kinds of mistakes, and courts can be finicky about things being filed properly, and courts can also be unbelievably difficult to work with. So I would say, yeah, like finding a lawyer who like knows how to deal with the courts is good, because the process is a pain. And, you know, there's the official process and then there's the reality, and those are two different things often. So yeah, like I would recommend generally that landlords get a lawyer. Sometimes you're fine without one. We saw one case where a woman was actually a tenant, and she was a tenant, and her landlord appealed a case that they lost against the tenant as a corporate landlord. Tenant was unrepresented, and basically like the landlord just had such a bad case that the tenant didn't really need to do anything. They just showed up, and the judge was like, this is based on a dispute of fact and I don't have jurisdiction, so I'm dismissing the case. So the tenant like won without really doing anything. But usually that doesn't necessarily happen that often. It's good to have somebody who can walk you through the process, because the process is kind of crazy.
All right, we got very short, about 3 minutes. We got to jump on to another Killa Unfiltered. I go from once a month to once a week to twice in 1 week. I don't know how it happened, but you guys are making it happen. Marc, if you can change anything at the landlord tenant board, divisional court, like I'll give you a few things if you want to change them. If you have an elected official in front of you right now, what do you want to see changed to bring justice back to the tribunals, to bring back to the court, to make it fair and balanced for both good landlords, good tenants, and taxpayers?
There has to be accountability with the adjudicators. I think like the most obvious thing is orders have to get issued in a timely manner. They have to say you have to get this order out in 60 days. And if you don't, you're going to get fired. If this happens like 3 times, you just can't get your orders out on time, or you're making things up. We hear that you're making up things in your orders. You're going to get fired because I just don't see any accountability. Maybe it's happening behind the scenes where I'm not seeing it, but I'm totally not seeing accountability. And in terms of like staffing and whatnot, look, if you have a problem with staffing, you need to pay for more adjudicators and pay them well. And look, there's a lot of people coming out of law school. I think there's a lot of paralegals. Focus on recruitment, pay people more, get people to want to be LTB adjudicators. But if you're paying them nothing, nobody wants to work there, you're overworking them, and the whole system sucks, well, then everybody else pays the costs. You know, in terms of like people talk about like taxes and stuff, it's like, you can pay the taxes, and the taxes could be spent on good things, or you can pay X amount of dollars in legal fees because the system doesn't work and everybody else has to deal with the externalities of the dysfunction.
No, that's a great response. And you know what? If you think about it, it's almost like a lot of people coming into Canada not keeping up with the healthcare or education system. You know, the thing.
Accountability. People, if I ran for office, and I will never run for office, but if I ran for office, my slogan would be everybody's getting fired. Marc Goldgrub, everybody's getting fired. Everybody's getting fired. You don't do your job, things aren't getting done, timelines aren't being met, fired. No tolerance. All right. Yeah. This is how things work now. You don't do your job, you're, leaving early, you're going to the park during work hours, all kinds of crazy stuff that I hear, you're getting fired. And I'll fight with the unions. I'm going to call every lawyer I know. We're going to war with the unions because there needs to be accountability in government. This is the big problem I see in Canada. No accountability, no consequences. If I ever ran for office, it would be everybody's getting fired. We are bringing back consequences. We're bringing back accountability.
Not the C word.
Yeah, seriously.
And you know what? It's true. There's no consequences in place. And I think I love how you're campaigning on that, because I think it's important. And hey, Marc, we never talked about it now, but if you can rate me like an article, I want to start putting some blogs on the Ontario Landlords Watch website from people like you who are in the trenches, boots on the ground. We need to have your voice heard. I love that you're so outspoken. Some people are very hesitant, especially in the legal force, that they're worried about, the Law Society and what comes just because you're trying to make the system a better place for all parties involved. I'm putting a link in the chat right now because we are doing an Ontario Landlords Watch registration. So everyone can fill that out. I need to know who I'm representing, where I can connect with you, because we do have a lot of changes happening at the provincial level and the municipal level. And we need to be able to kind of stay connected, not just on social media. And when you guys get to see my face or my links, or letting you know that I'm going live. So a great way for us to kind of keep connecting. Marc, if we ever can convince you to run for government, which level would you run for? If
No, I don't know. I'm never, maybe municipal. It's nice to be able to work with things directly with people, but in terms, let me just kind of, you said, about blogs. We have a blog. We have a housing law blog on greeneconomylaw.com. We have a monthly newsletter. We're happy if you want to share our blog posts. I'm sure, sometimes we write for Open Room. We're friends with Wei Ting. Maybe you know Wei Ting. So we sometimes publish with her, and we would love to get stuff out because we got a lot of complaints, and we would love for them to get to the ears of people who can actually make changes. And if anybody wants to keep up with our work, go to greeneconomylaw.com. You'll see a little pop-up for if you want to subscribe to the newsletter. And every month we're writing about sustainability, we're writing about psychedelics, and we're writing about housing. And we write all kinds of guides for landlords, tenants. We write about Divisional Court, and we try and make them practical. We find that a lot of the stuff the LTB's writing is difficult to read. It doesn't reflect the reality. It's outdated. So we try and give very practical advice from the trenches, as you said.
Yeah, no, I think we're on to something here now. And I think it's very key in talking about getting the education out there, telling people about different tools and services out there. And this is why I became the ambassador to Front Lobby, so that we can get more people reporting their monthly payment history for their tenants and the debt, and also making sure they're doing their credit checks. Never take a credit check from a tenant. It's either Photoshop. We don't know what's going on with it. Always making sure you're getting the tenant's IDs. These are different educational tips and sharing and being a part of this community. Marc, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I don't think it's going to be the last. I think we're going to need to have more time, because normally I could run this probably another hour and a half, but we are going to jump over to our Hamilton broadcast that's going to be happening around 7:15. And I want to thank you for being a part of the community and advocating, because I think our elected officials need to hear from you too, not just the landlords and the tenants who are always seem to be in the media. All right, everyone. Thanks so much. This is a wrap for our show. A big thank you to Marc joining us and sharing his expertise and the insights of the Landlord and Tenant Board. And unfortunately, the Divisional Court and the housing laws and the it's invaluable to our community by you sharing that. So thank you.
You're welcome. And if anybody wants to follow what I'm writing about, I'm active on LinkedIn in addition to the newsletter.
We got to get you on Facebook, though, so I can tag you. We got to. I know. This is why it's important to fill out my registration, so we can be part of a newsletter, so that you can write for my newsletter, so I can share it out to our people as well.
Sure.
I want to thank everybody for supporting Ontario Landlords Watch, our sponsors who are giving me the tools that I need to keep advocating for you. And your participation really helps us create that strong voice for our landlords and tenants and housing providers across Ontario. If you haven't already, make sure you fill out that registration. It does help me understand who's in our community, our landlords, our property managers, our realtors, our contractors, even our paralegals, and anyone working in this housing industry. We can continue to keep pushing for change that really does matter. I want to stay informed. Staying informed is such a strong key for us as housing providers, and getting to know what is happening so that we can be prepared and we are ready to act. And this is why we're doing another broadcast tonight at 7:15 with our residents in Hamilton, because a lot of things are happening there, and we need to let you know what's happening, because what's happening is that they're always going to start looking, each city starts looking at each other. So we really need to keep bringing this education out there. And I don't want anything to be impacted about when you got to see it, how you got to see it. And some people are like, sorry, Kayla, I got to see this, the last minute regarding your council meeting on the property standards in the city of Cambridge. I do need to make sure that we're building us a little bit stronger together. Marc, we got one sentence to give to our viewers right now. What would it be of advice?
Run the credit checks. And also, I mean, if you can look up the cases with people, open room is great. We had a case where somebody had declared 3 bankruptcies, but their landlord didn't know. So really check, do your research.
And this is why it's so important to get that debt attached to the person's credit. Sometimes landlords may not know about different services, but they do know about credit checks. So make sure that you get that debt reported to frontlobby.com and making sure that all of us are staying connected through that community as well. Marc, I can't wait to have you back on where we have more time. And I know you're passionate about other things. So I'm excited. Thank you everyone for watching and supporting Ontario Landlords Watch. We got a lot of things that I'm working on. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching Kayla Unfiltered, the Housing Call-In Show.